Hello, live stream audience out there in the world. My name's Sam Teicher, and I am the co-founder of Coral Vita, and we are a company that grows climate change resilient corals to restore dying reefs. So many of you may have heard the news this year. Great Barrier Reef has experienced mass mortality, severe bleaching from warming ocean temperatures caused by this year's El Nino. But this is actually an ongoing problem. We've seen more than 30% of the world's reefs die since the 1970s and are projected to lose 75% of reefs by mid-century. Now, this is obviously an ecological catastrophe, but it's also a socioeconomic one as well, because reefs support over 1 billion people around the world, 25% of marine life, and generate $30 billion a year through tourism, fisheries, and coastal protection. So what we do at Coral Vita is we grow corals that can be installed into reefs to help bring them back to life and protect those benefits. Now, coral restoration is a practice that's been ongoing for the past 20 or 30 years, and it's been shown to revitalize reef health. I actually helped start a UN-funded coral farm while I was helping run an organization called Eli Africa in Mauritius. And it was amazing to work with local fishermen, students, plant these corals, and see the lagoon and the reef come back to life with corresponding increases in fish life, maintaining a tourism draw for the area, and helping preserve those benefits. But what was also clear is the current model for reef restoration has got several limitations. So to begin with, you've got these ocean-based farms that have to be set up and maintained at each restoration site. Only the fast-growing, branching coral species can be realistically grown, limiting critical species diversity. There's little that can be done to enhance coral resiliency to the things that are killing them, such as warming and acidifying oceans. And the grant funding model does not cut it when we're thinking about 75% of reefs dead by mid-century. So with Coral Vita, we're setting up land-based farms, incorporating breakthrough methods to grow corals up to 50 times faster, which translates into months instead of decades, while enhancing their resiliency to climate change, and putting a business model on top of this, commercializing restoration, and selling that service to hotels, governments, private property owners, fishing associations, corporate sponsors, anyone that has a stake in reefs to create a financially sustainable system to scale up restoration. So we're using the microfragmenting method developed out of the Moat Marine Lab, where we can now grow bouldering massive corals that previously weren't able to be realistically grown, which helps from coastal protection to providing the baseline for habitats. Incorporating the assisted evolution methods out of University of Hawaii, we can now make corals more resilient to those ocean warming and acidification threats. And with a single land-based coral farm, if it's the right size, we can now grow corals to supply an entire nation's reefs rather than having to set up individual ocean-based farms. So this year, we're going to be launching our pilot coral farm down in the Caribbean. Really excited to share that we hit our fundraising goal of $600,000 last month. So that's going to let us build and run this first farm for about 2 years. And we're right now selecting locations and are still fundraising a bit more to try and finance some research and development projects, expand our impact, and do more programming in a community-based approach with local communities that depend on these healthy reefs. A little bit more about myself. Like I mentioned, I helped start a UN-funded coral farm while I was working in Mauritius. I also worked on climate change adaptation policy at the White House and worked for the Global Island Partnership, which is a coalition of island nations advancing and catalyzing sustainable development and conservation. My co-founder, Gator, and that's really his name, has worked on international development projects in Peru, Brazil, and South Africa. Was a fellow for the World Wildlife Fund's Global Marine Program, and we met at the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, where we studied business and the environment. We're being advised by Dr. Ruth Gates, Dr. David Vaughn, two of the scientists who developed these breakthrough methods that we're incorporating, and are really excited to get out into the ocean, start planting corals, and work with the global community, from scientists to activists to policymakers, private sector leaders, and average people all around the world to help bring reefs back to life. And we hope you'll come down to the Caribbean, plant corals with us. And again, we're Coral Vita, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much. What an inspiring initiative. Next up, we have the microfiber catcher team from Georgetown.
Hi, I'm Carter. I'm a Georgetown sophomore studying philosophy in the college.
And I'm Jamie. I am also a sophomore studying environmental biology in the college.
So every time a synthetic garment is washed, it sheds about 200, a synthetic fleece rather, it sheds about 250,000 microfibers. And now, that's a really big number, but why is that important? Well, these microfibers are tiny, tiny pieces of plastic that are released when any synthetic garment is washed, from your yoga pants to your fleece, and it's actually acrylic garments, which are the worst offenders, and they release up to 750,000 each wash, which is an astonishing number. And that's really problematic because these tiny plastics are way too small to be filtered by a lot of conventional wastewater treatment facilities, or washing machines themselves don't have a sufficient acceptable filter to catch them, I guess. And an estimated 40% of these fibers will make their way into aquatic ecosystems. And it's not like they're just tiny pieces of plastic floating around. This can have a devastating effect, especially on juvenile fish populations. And they're also excellent harborers of persistent organic pollutants. So they have a really, really huge surface area to volume ratio, so they can absorb a lot of these harmful chemicals. And this can lead to bioaccumulation all the way up the food chain, perhaps even to us.
So our solution is the fiber filter bag, which you can see right here, which goes right in the wash and filters out all of the microfibers. Here, do you wanna hold that out? Which filters out currently about 85% of the microfibers that come out from the synthetic garments, but we're working on bringing that number up. And how we got involved in this project is through a class that we took last semester called Science and Society Global Challenges, which has been really cool because something that started out as a class project has now turned into, a startup for us, but also something that we've become really passionate about that we honestly didn't know existed until 6 months ago, a little over 6 months ago now. So it's been a really, really interesting experience. So we are the microfiber team and making the fiber fleece bag, and we're so pleased to be here today, and so thank you, Sustainable Oceans Alliance, for having us.
Thank you. What a great solution to a problem that's affecting our oceans everywhere. Next up, we have Elizabeth Resch from Georgetown Law.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Elizabeth Anna Resch, and I'm the founder and the current president of the United Nations Association at Georgetown Law. A little bit about me first and how I got to doing this. I'm originally from Austria and did my JD law degree there. And then I worked at the United Nations at the Executive Office of the Secretary General in New York for a year, and then with UN Global Compact for a year. Always about the Sustainable Development Goals, so I was part of their adoption and their development beforehand. I hope you all know what the Sustainable Development Goals are. If not, I'm just going to quickly tell you it's 17 goals that range from the environmental to the economic and social dimension of sustainable development that were adopted by all member states of the United Nations about 1.5 years ago in September 2015. So, yeah, one thing about the United Nations that lots of people tell me always is, for example, the UN is failing with the situation of Syria, therefore the UN sucks in general. So one thing that I'm trying to do with this association is trying to promote all the values and work of the UN. Because, as you might know, peace and security is only one pillar of the United Nations, besides human rights and sustainable development. And the UN addresses lots of issues in our daily lives, going from aviation, postal offices, things like that. And it's really helpful in so many dimensions. So my association that I set up last October at Georgetown Law Campus is trying to address the whole values and the whole work of the United Nations on campus among students. And yes, that's pretty much what we do. And in the second part, we also want to raise the voice of youth and the voice of students in the international body of the United Nations. Because there's lots of students coming up to me always that say, oh yeah, you've worked with the UN, this is so great, I really want to do this too, I really want to intern, but it's so hard to get in, and I have no idea what UNHCR does as compared to the WHO, and how do they all work together, and it's just such a big body to them that seems very complicated and administrative from the outside, which it is, but it's also very accessible to youth if you know the right pathways. So I'm trying to get lots of students from Georgetown Law Campus to participate at actual UN fora in New York at the headquarters and at different other agencies. So we're trying to do that, and for example, we're also going to the Ocean Summit next month at the United Nations in New York. And then on a third part, because we are a Georgetown Law campus, we're trying to connect sustainability and human rights issues in the legal dimension. So at every event we address the regulatory framework of the law and issues that correlate with sustainability in the legal dimension. Because for lots of students, the issue is, oh, it's so hard to get into human rights work, and I either become a corporate lawyer and make lots of money there, or I have to work for a not-for-profit where I make no money and have no impact in the beginning, and it's all just about fundraising. And in my opinion, that's not true at all, because in every daily profession, you can relate your day-to-day work to sustainability and make an impact on the global scale. So why are we here today, and why are Georgetown Law students here presented today at the Sustainable Ocean Summit? Pretty much, first of all, we wanted to promote the UN Oceans Conference, and that's happening from June 5th to June 9th in New York. I'm sure you've heard about that today. A couple of students from Georgetown Law will be going to that, so if you're going, please talk to us, and we're happy to meet up with you there. And then we just want to show once again the interconnectivity of issues. Because the oceans, that's for example SDG, so Sustainable Development Goal 14, they also connect to lots of other issue areas in Sustainable Development Goals. For example, SDG 15, which is life on land, climate action, SDG 13, renewable energy, which is SDG 7. It also really correlates with sustainable agriculture and food production, which is SDG 2. And then it all comes together in SDG 17, which is partnerships for all of the Sustainable Development Goals. So what we're trying in our association is connect all of those issues and make sure that students, young people understand how their daily actions are interconnected with each other. So thank you so much to Elena and everyone that was part of this summit today and did such a great work organizing it. And yeah, if you want to find out about our work, just follow us on social media. We have Twitter, Facebook, everything. Thank you.
Thank you. And the UN's work is so important. One of the values is the Sustainable Development Goal 14, which is directly related to oceans. So we value everything the UN is doing. Next up, we have a representative from Citizens Climate Lobby talking to us about the important work they do.
Hi, so I'm a volunteer with a group called Citizens Climate Lobby. We are a mostly volunteer-led organization of about 400 chapters across mostly the US and Canada, but also around the world. And what we're trying to do here in the US in particular is try to get Congress to pass a price on carbon. And we've done studies on this that show not only will it address climate change, but it will also lower pollution-related deaths, and it will help the economy actually grow jobs and the GDP. So what we do in all of our chapters is we organize groups of people in districts around the country to lobby their members of Congress on this issue, and we reach out to other people in the community to let them know that there are so many co-benefits to addressing climate change. Some of the successes that we've had in the past several years is CCL has helped create the Bipartisan Climate Solutions Caucus in Congress, and that is a group of about 16 Republicans and 16 Democrats who've decided to come together and talk about how can we solve climate change. It's led in particular by two representatives on both sides of the aisle from Florida who are really dealing with the impacts down there urgently. The other things that we've done, in 2016, we had about 1,400 meetings with members of Congress. We had 40,000 letters to members of Congress, about 3,000 letters to the editor and op-eds in newspapers around the country. And again, we had about 400 chapters. So many economists say this is one of, and environmentalists say this is one of the most effective ways to solve climate change. And if you're interested in learning more, I encourage you to go to our website at www.citizensclimatelobby.org and click the join button. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And joining us now is Ana Guzman from Conservation International to talk about their virtual reality experiences.
Hi, Conservation International is an organization that works benefiting nature, but also people. we believe in science and what science can bring us together to look for new technologies and new tools to benefit people, but using sustainably nature. We are here presenting our VR video that it's about Valiance Reef, one of our seascapes projects. We have different seascapes projects. We have one in the TPS, the Eastern Tropical Pacific, that's in America, covering Ecuador, Colombia, Costa Rica, and Panama. And we have this in Indonesia that actually happens to have the house of the Valiance Reef's story. The Valiance Reef shows how communities are a keystone to make sustainable use of marine resources, especially in areas where they are the main dependable people on the marine resources. So the Valiance Reef shows us a story about how the community use sustainably the resources and makes changes in how we can impact or not the marine ecosystems. Shows how reefs are important, shows our linkages with other ecosystems and with people, and how these marine resources are essential for all of us.
Thank you for sharing that. Valiance Reef is such an important story of stewardship and connection to marine environments, and now that it's a virtual reality experience, it can connect millions around the world to the reef and experience it as if they were part of the community that depends on it for their survival. So thank you, Conservation International, for telling us about that. And thanks for tuning in to the live stream. Next up, we have Alexandra Parasso talking about the importance of art and how it can help us make the ocean famous.
Hi, my name is Alexandra Parasso, and I'm a senior in the college, and I'm studying environmental design, environmental art. And I really started getting into this, and I was really excited about looking at the intersection of art and design and science, and how art and design can influence and impact issues of sustainability and environmental science. And so coming into my senior year at Georgetown, where I created this capstone project, which I'm displaying at this conference today, I was coming back from a year abroad in Copenhagen. And one of the things that was really fascinating to me, going from the US to Copenhagen and then Copenhagen to the US, and also traveling a bit in Europe with my urban design class, and climate change classes, was the differences in infrastructure and the differences in cultural habits. And those two things, infrastructure and habits, I think are two tools that we can change. So we can change our infrastructure around us, and we can also change our habits in order to reduce our impact on the earth. And so I was really interested in looking at plastic waste. And so going into this year, I did a lot of research on plastic waste, specifically looking at plastic water bottles. And I was interested in plastic because that's the material that we use the most of in comparison to, or in relation to the amount that we don't need to use it. So there's a lot of these disposable plastics that we are sort of unnecessary. So if you think of all these plastic water bottles versus just using a reusable plastic water bottle, and the impact of that, if you're using hundreds of water bottles every year versus one. And so I'm interested in these plastic water bottles, and I designed a plastic wave, which is on display right now in between the business school and Regents. So feel free to stop by and check it out. But it's made completely of reusable and or reused and found materials, with a structure of metals that I found in dumpsters on campus, from a construction site right off campus, right by my house. And all the plastic is collected from bins around campus, mostly trash bins, but I also dug into some recycling bins as well, as I was collecting more. And so it's really just a visual representation of sort of this habitual, these habits that we have, and how wasteful it is. So that's about all for me. But yeah, feel free to stop by in between the business school and Regents to check out my wave. And if you're interested in looking at the intersection of art and science, I'd be happy to talk to you. Thanks.
Thank you very much for tuning in. That's our final session for the Exploration Fair today. And we'll be back at 12:30 with a breakout on effectively communicating an idea by Julia Robertson from the Ocean Conservancy, the VP of Communications. Thank you very much. We'll see you back here at 12:30.